Thank you for joining me. My name is Colonel Everett Peabody of the 25th Missouri Volunteer Infantry. You'll have to pardon my corporal's uniform. As I commented in a letter to my brother at the start of the war, us Missourians were not as well equipped as you Massachusetts soldiers were, but we made do with what we had. And I never saw men fight braver than the Missouri men that I had the honor of commanding. But I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts on June 14th, 1830. My father was William B.O. Peabody, who was the pastor of the Unitarian Church here in Springfield. He was also one of the founders of this cemetery. So it was actually for a while called the Peabody Cemetery because of my father's influence in establishing it here at this location. I grew up in Springfield, but then I went off to college. I graduated from Harvard in 1849, and after graduation, I specialized in civil engineering. I worked for a time for the city of Boston on their waterworks, but then I went west. I went to Missouri, where I focused on railroads. I became the chief engineer of the Memphis and Ohio Railroad, earning a salary of $3,000 a year, which was remarkable money for the 1850s. So I was doing well, and I moved around a few times to a few different railroads, but then the Great Rebellion of 1861 happened, and I, along with other patriotic Missourians, answered the call to join the cause of our country, and I joined the Union side. Missouri was a border state, it legalized slavery, but it also had a large contingency of Union-minded people, such as myself. And just as my grandfather, Moses White, right over there, had answered his country's call when the British were threatening to control this great nation, I did the same when the enslavers of the South threatened to control the future of this country. So I became a major. I was commissioned as a major in the 13th Missouri Regiment. I served in that capacity for a few months, but then I was promoted to the colonel of that regiment in September 1861. A few weeks later, I was involved in the First Battle of Lexington, Missouri, where I was wounded twice and taken prisoner at the end of the battle. I was imprisoned by the Confederates until December, and then I was released and soon set about starting a new regiment. My old 13th regiment had been captured, and the number had been reassigned, but I raised a new regiment, and we became the 25th Missouri Regiment. In March of 1862, we were assigned to Ulysses S. Grant's Army of the Tennessee, and we were transferred to the small town of Pittsburgh Landing in southern Tennessee. Now, at this point, Ulysses S. Grant was making progress moving south into Tennessee in the Western Theater. Unlike his counterparts in the Eastern Theater, Grant was actually able to do things, and he was successful in starting to divide the western part of the Confederacy. He was moving south through Tennessee, and he was being joined by Don Carlos Buell, who was another major general who was coming south from Nashville, and they were meeting at Pittsburgh Landing. But they were deep in enemy territory, and they knew it, and the Confederates knew it. There were reinforcements on the way, but it was going to take time, and the Confederates knew that if they were going to strike, now was the time. So my regiment was part of the 6th Division of the Army of the Tennessee, and we were almost all green recruits, except for myself and a few of my men who had served in the 13th Missouri. But otherwise, it was mainly men who were brave, but they were inexperienced. And many of the commanding officers were also inexperienced, including my own commanding officer, General Benjamin Prentiss. So we were stationed right in between where the Union camp was and where the Confederates were in Corinth. But we had very few pickets who were assigned to patrol, and this had me a little worried. We had a skirmish on April 4th, 1862, very minor, but we knew there were Confederates in the area. And all day on April 5th, I kept getting reports that there were Confederates nearby. General Prentiss shrugged this off. General Sherman shrugged it off. They weren't too concerned. They thought it was just a small force. I knew there might be something bigger. So in the early morning hours of April 6th, I sent a letter to Benjamin Prentiss asking him to send out a patrol. He did not respond to that letter in time, so I took matters in my own hands and organized a patrol of 250 soldiers. They had set it out about 3 o'clock in the morning. At about 5, they encountered a very large Confederate force and exchanged fire. This began the Battle of Shiloh. And at first, when Benjamin Prentice first found out about this, he was furious. He accosted me, claimed that I had started a battle that they were not going to be able to be prepared to fight. He blamed me for it until he realized this was not some minor skirmishing party that was descending on us. This was the entire Confederate Army of Tennessee. So what we had done inadvertently was disrupt the Confederate advance. The Confederates were hoping to catch us completely off guard, but my brave, valiant men fended them off long enough to get the rest of the Union Army ready to fight that day's battle. So that way it bought the Union Army a few hours before the entire Confederate Army descended upon them. Now, we took heavy losses in the process, and we did have to fall back a few times. But we held our ground for several hours until another Confederate brigade attacked us, and then at that point, things got a little tricky. I was shot 4 times, but I stayed on my horse. I kept commanding my men until a 5th gunshot hit me in the head and killed me instantly. In the meantime, though, my men kept fighting, the rest of the Union Army kept fighting, but it was a difficult day for the Union. They were driven back, they were on the ropes, and then the Confederate Army paused at nightfall, and this gave us the opportunity to regroup. Not me personally, but my men and the other Union soldiers who were there. They used that night to regroup, to reform, and the next day counterattacked the Confederates, drove them back, and won the battle. It was a costly victory for the Union, with over 1,400 men killed, 8,000 wounded, many of whom later died, and almost 3,000 captured or missing. But it was a victory. Do not listen to those the rumors that General Grant was drunk during this battle. That is a malicious lie that was made up by the partisans of Don Carlos Buell. Grant performed valiantly, and thanks to that battle, it elevated his reputation, it elevated the reputation of General Sherman, and preceded the great things that they would accomplish over the next 3 years of the war. Of course, I did not live to see any of that. I was temporarily buried at Shiloh, but then after the war, I was reinterred here at Springfield Cemetery beneath this obelisk that was dedicated here by my brothers. So thank you all for joining me here today, and I hope that you enjoyed your time at Springfield Cemetery.